Hey everyone, I want to talk real quickly about gaps and how I use them as a trader to try and tilt probabilities in my favor in the short term and also clear up some misconceptions. The first one being a lot of people call higher and lower opens gaps, but a gap implies that the candle opens above or below the range of the previous candle, meaning there's a gap in price that was not hit. So if there's a gap on the 5, 15-minute or intraday charts, I automatically know that is not a liquid name because liquid names do not have gaps on short-term timeframes. Gaps on the daily timeframes are one of the clearest examples of us needing to train ourselves to do the opposite of what our emotions would tell us to do. Gap ups are often for selling in the face of short-term euphoria, and gap downs are often for buying in the face of short-term extreme fear. So we're going to look at a couple examples of this because oftentimes we can use gaps to mark tops and bottoms. So let's just look at a couple examples here. This one, we're going to look at MSOS, the cannabis sector, which is getting a lot of attention over this past week. But in the past, gap up opens were signals for bears, and I'm going to show you a few of those. And so it's the kind of thing where, if I'm in a position that I'm not going to be selling in the short term, I do not want to see a gap up open. A lot of people say, I hope we gap up open because that means we're going to see, more gains quicker in the short term. But if you look back, the bears have been using this as a signal consistently. For example, here we have a small example, daily high or low. This is your gap up open. The bear's in full control from there. Here's a little daily uptrend. The first time we see a gap up open on that move, it marks the top. We pull back for weeks from there. Back here, one day big green candle. There's our gap. It marks the top into a big pullback. You can do this for, years almost on this ticker. You go back here. This was a gap up open, not a big one, but we opened at 730. The high of the previous day was 727. That marks the top for a major pullback. Bears have been using gaps for signals for a long time in the sector. Look here. No gap, no gap, no gap. Gap up open. Bears control for weeks. It's a clear signal. And so at this point in time, we have this big price action. What you could say would, this is the most bullish news for this sector that we've seen in months, if not a year plus. Why aren't we gapping up? Well, that's a good thing. That's keeping the move going. That's keeping a lot of supports being established on the short-term timeframes on the way up. And so again, I don't want to see gap up opens because bears have been using that as a clear signal for a very long time in this sector. Likewise, I use it as support, or I should say for entries. Tesla, I have a swing position on Tesla from this daily oversold bounce, and I wanted to look long on Thursday. Now, keep in mind, it's not every single gap. Before we get into this, if it's on earnings, that gap means a lot less to me. If we're going to gap up and run, it's often on news, and that's a possibility. So obviously, it doesn't work every time. This is just to try and shift the probabilities in our favor a bit. And so we have to keep in mind that ideally we want it to align with extremes. So on this instance for Tesla, we gapped down here. We were not at daily oversold conditions yet. We kept dropping. I was looking for a long entry on Thursday. We didn't gap down open, and I didn't take a trade. The bears controlled the entirety of the day. Then on this day, Friday, we gapped down. I used that to enter long. And from that point, we then saw a bounce from the lows there of 24%, 23% in under 2 weeks. So again, the gaps often mark climax tops and bottoms when you're reaching extremes. VFS, bit of a pump and dump stock here. Guess what marked the top? No gap, no gap, no gap. We're shooting up, 100%, 200%, 300%. There's your gap. There's the top. Massive pullback from that point. So keep an eye on gaps as potential reversals when we're in extremes. Go to the NASDAQ. Look at the NASDAQ in the last month, or even just the last couple of weeks. We've been bouncing, and we're in a daily uptrend over the last 2 weeks, we'll say. And guess what bear days, guess what caused the bear control days? This is a gap up open. Our previous day this past Friday, this was a gap up open that dropped on the morning. Not a lot of bear follow through. This is a gap up open with a huge bear day. 2 weeks ago, this was a gap up open where the bears controlled the day. So oftentimes it's only a short-term signal. There's your gap down open for the bounce. It's often a short-term signal pertaining to only one day. But again, you want to burn it into your brain that as a general rule of thumb, Gap ups are for selling, gap downs are for buying. And to apply it back to cannabis again, back when Canadian cannabis was running into its first day of legalization sales, that was a strategy that we at the Chart Guys used in our chat room every day, where we would close strong, we would sell the gap up open in the morning, we would drop on the gap up open, and we would then buy first 5-minute oversold conditions. And that play worked like magic for a significant period of time, and that allowed us to lock in profits, reload cheaper, and that's something to be keeping an eye on if things get spicy in cannabis yet again. So if this is a new concept for you, just observe, watch how it plays out, paper trade it, and practice with it, and then eventually you get comfortable with it, and you can use it to ideally increase your profit. Sell into short-term euphoria, reload on consolidation, and feel free to ask any questions. Appreciate you watching.